Hey, this is Caleb. Would it be possible for me to share my screen and drive the PowerPoint during the presentation?
Sure, I was going to do that, but if you want to do that, I can give over control. It's not a problem.
Thanks. Yeah, just so it makes it easier for me to page back and forth what page we're on.
There you go.
Okay, 10:35 on the dot, and with Paul's arrival, sorry to call you out, we have official quorum. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Health Insurance Marketplace Advisory Committee meeting regarding the proposed 2024 Marketplace Assessment Rate or Administrative Charge for the Marketplace. Before we get going, I would like to take a quick roll call, please, to see who is with us today. If you are available by video and phone or phone, please indicate so. Chair Craig Anderson.
I'm here by video and by video, I guess.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Gladys Batwell. Ron Gallinack.
Here, video.
Thank you, Ron. Mary Beth Guarino. Paul Harmon.
I'm here by video.
Thank you. Lindsay Hopper sent us a message that she's not able to attend today. Kathleen is no longer with us. Ines Kemper. Joni Moore. Holly Sorensen.
Hello, I'm here by video on Teams.
Morning, Holly. Director Andrew Stolfi. He might be a little busy. It is legislative season. Om Sakinai.
Yes, here. Good morning.
Good morning. Drew Tarab.
Good morning, here via video.
Thank you, Drew. And Neshoba Timperley.
I'm here joining by video.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody. We do have official quorum. Thank you for joining us today. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the meeting to go over the proposed 2024 Marketplace Assessment Rate. This is really the rate that we charge medical plans, individual medical plans, and standalone dental plans that helps fund our operations for the following calendar year. Currently, for calendar year 2023, we have $5.50 per member per month for individual medical health plans and 36 cents per member per month, or PMPM, for standalone dental plans. We have been fortunate to have Caleb from Optimus, CBiz Optimus, and he did a wonderful job putting together the memo, all the slide decks, all the slides you will see in front of you, and he will really be able to explain to you the modeling of how between the expenditures, the projected expenses, and then the budget all will play out. And hopefully you will find that the proposed 2024 rate is to your liking. So Caleb, I will pass it off to you.
Thanks. My name's Caleb Levon. I was the Medicaid forecaster for Oregon for many years, but just last year I switched over to the private sector, and so I'm a senior manager at Optimus now, but doing similar work with forecasting and rate setting and stuff. And Chiki asked me to help out here, and I had some familiarity with it, so I was happy to help. So the purpose of this, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It's like I'm gonna drag this over here. Sorry about that. Taking a second. So, a quick overview. As Chiki mentioned, we're going to talk about the rate history, what the expenditures are. Really, the meat and potatoes of the estimate will be what we expect the medical plan enrollment to be. And based on then that rate and the enrollment, that'll give us a revenue estimates. And we'll talk about some of the smaller or not less important, but some of the ancillary things regarding the fund balance and the revenue cap and stuff like that. So, as you mentioned, the assessment rate has been $5.50 for the last 3 years now. $5.50, and before that it was $6. So it's been pretty stable for a while, and that's raised sufficient revenue. So we're not proposing any big change. We're not proposing a change there, but I'll talk about some of these details. So the expenditures have increased over time, although I do want to point out that the switch from DCBS to the health authority did involve that's why some of these numbers are not even, and shared expenses kind of bounced around a little in 2022. And so we're using the actual expenditures up till last year, and then using the legislatively approved budget for the remainder of 2023, and then the agency request for 24-25. So that is where these expenditures, the actuals, and then the forecasts are coming from. And so those expenses for 24-25 do seem higher, but those would be caps. Those would be statutory caps based on the agency request. And so in the end, they may not spend those, right? That would be their limit that they could spend. And obviously there's a switch from SAC to from the shared services at DCBS versus the Oregon Health Authority shared assessment and enterprise-wide costs. But you can see those are roughly similar numbers. I assume that the expenditures will kind of grow at a 3%. It's not actually particularly germane for fiscal year 2024, 2025, but I had, offline, I had looked out further into the future and had been using a 3% increase looking forward. So that's sort of roughly the ballpark of what we might expect if you're looking further into the future. So the big question, as I said, that the driving force in determining what we need to set the assessment at in order to cover those expenditures is how many people do we expect to see on the plan. And so our per member per month at $5.50, we multiply that by the number of members each month that we foresee having, and that gives us our revenue. So estimating how many people we expect to see on the plan over the next couple of years is an important part of this exercise. And this is really highlighting the seasonal variation that we see in the enrollment for medical plan enrollment. We see that enrollment sort of spikes in January during the open enrollment period, and then typically falls kind of in a slow, steady pattern over the course of the year. At least that's how it behaved before the pandemic. So the lighter lines, you see the gray and the very light blue and the light yellow, those are the older data. That's pre-pandemic data. And it, started at 135 or 140,000, and then fell down to, 120,000 roughly by the end of the year in the pre-pandemic period. It was pretty steady and very consistent. And then there's a couple of dashed lines, and those are the pandemic years, right? Those are, and they show quite a bit more variation. They're flatter. There was also a transition in federal administration, as you're well aware, and particularly in 2021, there was open enrollment into the marketplace for the whole year. Well, not for the whole year, but for a big chunk of the middle of the year. So people could sign up in the middle of the year, and you'll see that blue dashed line with the circles is pretty flat, kind of through April to August, and that reflects when the federal government opened up the open enrollment period. Normally, the open enrollment period was always centered kind of around November to January, and it varied from year to year. During, the Trump administration, it was curtailed to just November 15th to December 15th. And then under the Biden administration, they opened that up, and there was a longer period. And so in the 2022, you actually see an increase from January to February, which we hadn't seen before. And that reflects the fact that the open enrollment period had opened up into January. And so we were still signing people up in January, and that caused the enrollment to go up for the February numbers. We expect that to continue, hence the forecasted numbers, which are the red and the green, the more saturated colors, the solid lines. We expect increased enrollment from January to February, and then we do expect it to fall off, but not at the rate that it traditionally had. And there's a couple of factors going into that. First, there's all of the efforts to try and keep people on the waiver amendments to try to reduce the impacts of the unwinding for Medicaid, and the various outreach efforts that are being made, and better systems and an integration so that people can get signed up automatically, and that people are less likely to lose their eligibility, but for various reasons. So we do expect the enrollment to fall over time, but not to the extent. And now I'm going to go into a little more detail, but I want to pause here and just, if people have questions, this is, you don't have to save them for the end, just jump in at any time. It's kind of a long, lonely monologue if you just listen to me for 45 minutes talking about all of this stuff, but I'm happy to do it. But if you have any questions, please jump in. I'm going to talk specifically about the January and February numbers, and then I'm going to show you, in fact, I'll show you now. I'm just going to jump ahead 2 slides, but we'll back up. There's what a time series of, if you just want to look at it over time, and maybe this is more familiar, you can kind of see that seasonal pattern creates the sawtooth, but then there's a disruption during the pandemic, and then kind of the pattern that I expect to see going forward is the orange line. But I'm going to back up and talk about those 2 preliminary estimates, those 2 dots, because they kind of determine where the peak is each year. And that kind of leads to what we expect the overall number to be. The peak each year kind of sets the overall number to some degree. And so we do have January and February data for this year. Unfortunately, that data isn't finalized, and it doesn't get finalized for up to 18 months, which is really quite a long period. Mostly, it settles down pretty quickly, but not entirely. And so, and it varies by providers. So there's, I'm trying to remember, 5 or 6 providers, and so I have each of their individual numbers, and you'll see some, like their January numbers, when they post them in January, that's what they look like 18 months later. Others, the numbers change really dramatically. And so for this estimate, what I went through provider by provider and looked at whether their January and February numbers were consistent with, say, what they were in December. There was one, for example, that had December numbers of like 20,000, but their January numbers were 5,000. So and that they had a pattern of that where they often were revising their January and February numbers up pretty dramatically. And so even though the January numbers for this year were as low as 116,000, which is very low, it's missing presumably at least 15,000 enrollees, if that makes sense, right? We expect those January numbers to get revised. And so when I went through and did that estimate for each provider, I ended up with an estimate for January of roughly 133,000 for January and 134,000 for February. And so that's where those numbers are coming from. They're coming from looking at the incomplete provider numbers and trying to estimate what they'll look like when they're completed. We don't even have the January numbers from last year, the final numbers. We won't get those until July. Historically, for the last 6 years, the final numbers have all been between 130,000 and 139,000. We expect that to continue. We don't expect any dramatic deviation. There is obviously opportunity for error. There's not a formal range here, but I would expect that the number could pretty easily be plus or minus 2,000 to 5,000. I wouldn't think it would be 5,000, but 2,000 wouldn't surprise me on these estimates. Okay, so using those two data points sort of as the starting point for the year, then we're fitting an estimate into, we're forecasting an estimate forward. In the end, I'm using what's called exponential smoothing. It's just a statistical technique for forecasting, a seasonal exponential smoothing model. It ends up sort of fitting, and I'm using historical data before the pandemic and during the pandemic. So I'm using a few years before the pandemic and also during the pandemic. And the result ends up being kind of a blend of those, where it's capturing that sawtooth pattern. I expect that to sort of reemerge, but I also don't expect it to be quite as volatile as it had been previously. So, and you'll notice, like, for example, it captures the recent development of an increase from January to February. We really only saw that in the last year and this year, but it captures that moving forward. So that assumes that the open enrollment period would continue into January in future years. It does show the decline, but not as large. And so this is really just statistically, it's sort of fitting the patterns that we saw pre-pandemic with the patterns that we've seen during the pandemic, kind of mushing them together, coming up with an increase. That overall increase, even though it's seasonal, the overall increase is about 1.4% per year. So not a dramatic increase, but it in line, actually slightly larger than the population growth, but not dramatically larger, and in line with kind of recent trends as we've gotten more people signed up over time.
Caleb?
Yeah.
You have a hand up from Drew Tarab. I believe he might have a question or a comment.
Sure. Sorry.
Hi, thank you, Shiki. Yeah, this is Drew Tarab from Providence. Kel, can you explain a little bit about why you think the regression through the year, or the decline through the year, will shallow out in the post-pandemic years?
Yeah.
As opposed to returning to the pre-pandemic slope?
Yeah, so with the onset of integrated eligibility, we're seeing overall, the various waiver plans and stuff, and I know that's not directly impacting you, but the state has made a lot of efforts to try to keep people on various caseloads, and it's caused a pretty large decline in the way people drop off of Medicaid. So I expect to see similar sorts of patterns in the health insurance marketplace as well. Certainly, we have seen that in the last 2 years. Now, the question is, will that continue, or will things revert like back to where they were? And I think that they will continue to some degree, but not. I do expect some fall off, but not the full fall off. So I am splitting the baby a bit here. And there's not a particular science. I mean, this model, the orange line, is like literally just a statistical fit of the last sort of 5 years of data, 4 years of data, no, 5 years of data. So I'm not tweaking with it or anything. I literally just fit a pretty basic statistical model through there, and this is what it came out. But you always want to check that with your reasonableness. Does that seem reasonable? And I do think that's reasonable, but it is a judgment call. And do you feel differently? Is there some angst about that? Do you think that we will return to? I mean, those periods from like 2017 to 2019 where we saw, I mean, that's a pretty big swing of 20,000 people dropping off each year, and that was kind of unfortunate, really.
I mean, you asked the question, I don't know, honestly. I could make a good argument within that with the post-pandemic, the shape might look like the pre-pandemic, more closer to the pre-pandemic, as opposed to the unusual circumstances during the public health emergency.
Yeah.
But you're right, but it's not as if there aren't new interventions in place since the pandemic, which might change in essence, talk about consumer behavior here.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get what was the thinking behind your approach, and it's good to know that it's in essence a statistical inclusion of the pandemic years as well as the pre-pandemic years.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what's driving that. But I don't think that's unreasonable. I mean, the question is, what is causing people to drop off, and it's employment, and a job that has health insurance, and moving out of state, and all these various factors. And will those be smaller? It's tough to know for sure. I did have a section here just on the impacts of the Medicaid redeterminations, and you might be, and I don't know if people have these concerns, but I wanted to address them directly. Certainly it could be raised the question of, well, when they unwind all of those Medicaid enrollees, are they going to all spill over into the marketplace? And I don't know if people had that in their minds, but it was a question that I considered. And so I had done a lot of the initial analysis, fiscal impacts and stuff for the unwinding before I left. And one thing, there was a lot of work put into trying to stop large numbers of people from dropping off of Medicaid. And the concern would be they drop off of Medicaid and end up on the health insurance, or they'd exit Medicaid because they're no longer eligible and end up on the marketplace. But there's a number of interventions in place, and I found this surprising when I researched it, that actually a pretty small number of people typically come to the marketplace directly from Medicaid. I don't know if people are aware of this numbers, but there's research out there. Kaiser had done some, and you can see it in our own Oregon data. If you drill down to the individual level data, that it's only 3 to 4% of the people coming off of Medicaid that exit Medicaid go directly into the marketplace. And I don't know if you found that surprising, but I did. It seems small, right? But there's a number of reasons for that. Maybe people that are coming off of Medicaid are finding jobs with health insurance. Maybe people that come off Medicaid are just not good at signing up for the marketplace. It's not to say that they don't end up on the marketplace eventually. That's certainly true. But the impact, the direct impact has historically been pretty small. Now, Oregon is also putting in place the Bridge Plan, which is a basic health plan for people under 200% of FPL. Children will have continuous eligibility under age 6 and 2 years of continuous eligibility from 6 to 18. So I feel that the overall impact on marketplace enrollment will be fairly small from the Medicaid unwinding. But I anticipated there might be questions about that, and if there are, I'm happy to talk about it more. Okay.
This is Craig. Do you mind if I jump in, Caleb? Just
sure.
To react to that a little bit. I agree it's not real significant, but I don't know that the historical percentage is applicable with the unwinding. And the reason I say that is I think there are a number of people who are on Medicaid who probably, well, they don't look like historical Medicaid. There are people who probably have higher incomes that have retained Medicaid coverage. And I think there are some studies out there, and I was trying to quickly look for that as you were talking, but I can't find it, where it's maybe closer to 11% might qualify for marketplace coverage. So I would caution using, it's we're in a different world with Medicaid. So, but to your point, it's probably not that significant. And while I'm talking here, just if I could rattle off a couple other questions, if you don't mind. So one is, you use the term providers, but I assume you mean carriers or insurance companies.
Sorry.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. And then maybe you're going to get to this, but it sounded to me like you're not making an explicit impact. But you're saying it's a small impact on enrollment for market people moving off of Medicaid.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
Yeah, so if you look at the period pre-pandemic, the marketplace numbers were actually going down, a slow trend, but like if you look at those 3 years before the pandemic, there was actually a slightly downward trend, and then during the pandemic, they had gone up. I'm forecasting about a 1.4% growth, which is a bit of a reversal. So, and I think I put that down mostly to better efforts to try to bring people over from Medicaid to the marketplace, and better outreach and interventions and stuff like that. And I think those will have an impact. I think they will cause some growth, even, if the economy is strong, even if people are getting jobs and more jobs have health insurance. I do foresee growth, but not dramatic growth.
Okay, and then while you're on this slide, Caleb, and I don't know that it really matters for our discussion today for the assessment since it's 2024, but in 2025, if the bridge plan does proceed and we go to a full basic health plan, I think we may lose membership out of the marketplace. Maybe something to consider for future iterations of this.
Yeah, it's possible. And you wouldn't, because those people, what you would see was less people signing up. So it's not like you would see people drop off in 2025. I don't think. I think you would just see slower growth, if that makes sense. But, it's possible. I don't understand the intricacies of how they're going to implement the bridge plan, because I sort of, in my mind, they have a sort of interim plan to keep people on and transition to the bridge plan in 2025. So I'm not expecting that, but yeah. So there might be nuances there that I'm not including here, but it's an interesting thought. But as you say, it doesn't impact the assessment for calendar year 2024. So given these estimates, then And then I was actually going to talk. So there's some ancillary stuff that also that's not directly impactful to what the assessment needs to be, but plays into some of the stuff around it as far as like the total percentage that the assessment makes out of the premium, stuff like that. So there was reasons for me to estimate these, but these numbers don't tie directly to what the assessment should be, because I would anticipate there might be some disagreement. I don't know. So when I look through the average medical premiums, if I fit a line through the historical premiums in the Oregon marketplace, this is what I get. It's about 3.4% increase per year. Now that's not necessarily consistent with, for example, the inflation and national medical expenditures, but premiums have been increasing at a lower rate traditionally than overall medical expenditures. And when I look into it, obviously CMS has done estimates on this, Kaiser's done estimates on this, Kaiser Family Foundation, and you get a lot of different takes on where this is going to be and what it's been historically. I do know the numbers for 2023, obviously. When I look at, for example, I just pick a point, I pick a kind of a representative plan, like a 40-year-old non-smoker in Portland Metro. I think it's the increase for 2023 was 2.9% over the previous year, for example, the average, the weighted average. People might have different takes on this. Like I said, it doesn't play in directly. It plays into just the total percentage that the assessment makes out of the premium, and there's a cap on that. That's why we have to make an estimate. But no reasonable number would cause that cap to be binding, so it doesn't impact the assessment rate. But this is what I get. The numbers I've seen have been anywhere from 2% to 6% on this. As I said, when I did some research online, trying to find other estimates on this for national numbers. Typically, they're all national numbers, but this is what I get when I fit the recent increases, and they seem in the ballpark. So given that, we also have to account for dental enrollment. And it's a small part, but it is a part of the revenue that's raised. And so dental enrollment was kind of flat, and then it showed kind of spiky increases in the last 2 years. So I have a rough growth in this a little higher than it had been pre-pandemic, but lower than it grew like last year. And like I said, it's a relatively small part. Dental premiums, this isn't set at 0. I should have noted that, but so this is kind of zoomed in on what dental premiums, the average dental premium has been bouncing around a bit, but I just assumed $35 for an average. And I know it's higher and lower in various places, but just as an average. So this goes back to the slides before these enrollment estimates, but the total expenditures for calendar year 2024 were 9.4 million. And then if we assume some dental assessment revenue at 36 cents per, I'm sorry, I missed the chat comment, and also there's some investment income because the plan keeps quite a bit of funds on hand. So we subtract those out, and the required revenue from the medical assessments is a little over 9 million. So then we look at the sensitivity of the forecast model. What types of revenue would we raise at various assessment rates and various forecast estimates? So the center forecast estimate is 132,000. That's the yearly average. by month if I take the average over the year for the month by month. So that's 132,000 is the average. And then we look at, if that's high or low by 5 or 10 or 15. And 5 wouldn't be too surprising. 10, that's kind of where the limit of what I would expect, and 15 would seem like a pretty big miss to me. And then the assessment rates, we look at assessment rates from $5 up to $6, and you can see if the forecast is high and the rates are high, then we raise more money. If the forecast is low, or if the actuals, I should say, not the forecast, but the actual enrollment comes in high, we raise more money. If the actual enrollment comes in low, we raise less, and based on the assessment rates. The column on the right, called the equilibrium rates, that's given our 9.15 million in revenue that we estimate that we require. Then these are what the rates would be at those forecast levels to cover that 9.15 million. And you'll notice we are recommending $5.50 as a assessment rate, and the equilibrium rate is just a bit higher than that. It is not dramatically higher. That's sort of, and there's certainly, if that turns out to be precise and accurate, there's definitely sufficient funds to cover, that couple 100,000 in shortfall if our estimates are right on. Remember that the revenue numbers are sort of the statutory cap, and realistically, we don't expect to use that full revenue necessarily. And traditionally, the plan is covered more money in assessments than the expenditures, and so they've had a pretty large positive balance for all of the recent history. But this gives you some sense of the sensitivity. If our estimates are off by this much, this is the sort of shortfalls or the excesses we might see. Is that all? Yeah. A question?
So looking to these slides on the forecast, so if you said the Medicaid unwinding would come about 3.4%, so that doesn't mean that we will accomplish the forecast plus 5,000 easily then, am I right?
Well, I mean, my forecast I feel that my forecast accounts for the Medicaid unwinding. It wasn't it wasn't a direct input, but I feel like that forecast is reasonable given the unwinding. So I didn't assume that there would be an extra amount from I don't assume that there will be an extra amount above the forecast that I have here from the Medicaid unwinding.
Let's see. Thank you.
But I mean, to the question is like, which side is the error more likely to be on? I think you could argue that the error is more likely, that the enrollment is more likely to be high than low. But I forecast my best estimate, and it could have errors in either direction. So then the next slide is really just a big table with all of these sort of details in it for the recent history, and then calendar year 2024 is sort of highlighted with some dashed lines there. The assessment rate has a dashed line under it at 550, but you can see sort of the average enrollment, what that changes compared to previous years, the total premiums based on our premium estimate, and actual premiums for the past. And the rate as a percentage of the average premium is a little under 1%. There's also federal technology charges. I haven't really talked about that, but don't want to get sidetracked, but if there's a switch to the state plans, then that changes. But currently, the federal technology charges to run the federal portion of the marketplace is 2%, and that's on top of the assessment. And then there's a similar layout for the dental plan, and then the combined numbers. And the combined numbers, including the assessment and the federal charges, is a little less than 3% of the average premium overall. Hope that all seems reasonable. So there is a statutory cap on the marketplace account balance. So that means that the end of each biennium, if the marketplace fund balance is too large, there has to be kind of a rebate. And it's a quarter of the next biennium's legislatively approved budget. When we look at the numbers, the current account balance, and obviously we don't have the legislatively approved budget yet. Well, sorry, no, I take that back. We do have the legislatively approved budget for 21-23, right? No. So we have the legislatively approved budget for 21-23, and we have the current balance. The balance that matters is at the end of June, at the end of the biennium. But we anticipate a $1.9 million rebate for calendar year 2024 that would get dispersed over 2024. And that's just, you know, the assessment has been raising a bit more funds than the revenue has been a bit higher than the costs, the expenditures. And those expenditures have been going up. We don't anticipate that would continue. And you'll notice the assessment is a little bit lower this lower than the sort of the max. So I'll show you well, actually, I take that back. I also just wanted to mention the federal exchange technology charges. The reason that was all included in there is that there's a regulation that the state assessment and the federal charge collectively cannot exceed 5%. So that's why I did all that math around that, is to ensure that was not a binding constraint. And it's currently like 3.1, and we expect it to be a little under 3% going forward.
Caleb, we have a question. It looks
sorry,
like Paul
Paul.
Harmon has,
Yep. And I'm not sure if it's a Caleb question, but isn't 1.9 million like 25% of the annual budget or annual assessment revenue? It just feels like actually a huge number, and kind of would make me think, why not lower the assessment to the consumer if there's often a surplus, and particularly again, assuming it just feels like a big surplus to me that we're, you know, basically consumers are paying this. And I guess, how does that work?
Yeah, there has been extra funds, but there's also, you know, we have to ensure that we do cover the marketplace, you know, the expenditures. So at least for this year, we're actually if our numbers and our estimates are all correct, we should come in under, and we wouldn't, you know, the way it's set up now, we would not estimate that there would be any sort of rebate for 23-25. But given that, I understand your concern about
just because costs are going up. I guess I missed that. Like,
yeah. Here, I'm going to back up to, actually, I'm going to back up quite a ways here to the expenditures. And at least in the agency request budget, you know, it's 9.2 and 9.5 million for 24-25. And that's the cap, like I said, but traditionally they haven't used all of the funds from the cap, and that's generally where the difference has been.
okay. And that's just where it, you know, my concern is Oregon has one of the highest fees for the exchange. And if we're not actually spending the money, then why are we charging $550? I guess, that because we might spend the money, but history says we don't actually, which is good. But hey, we've already made the consumer pay an extra $100 a year for insurance, just in case.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have an obligation to cover the potential expenditures, but yeah, I understand the sort of looking at it historically, it does seem like we've raised excess funds, but if we say that we are not going to cover all of the expenditures for this year, I mean, I think that's it's just a position that Oregon can't be placed in. I don't know if there's other thoughts.
Well, maybe I can help
Mhm.
help out a little bit from how I'm interpreting how this was done. And Paul, I'm with you. I don't want to pass anything on to consumers that we don't need to, but a couple things. It sounded to me like, listening to you and reading the memo, which I can't say I'm an expert, that maybe the historical years, the expenditures were less because of some of the movement between the marketplace, DCBS and OHA, and maybe even some other funds. I can't remember the details. So the historical baseline, it maybe is not quite right for future. And specifically for 2023, it sounded like we use actual expenditures up through December, which
Yeah,
maybe are more accurate to the current state. That's what I was reading into it.
yeah, and those, estimates for the last 2 quarters out of the 8, but yeah, it's close to 9 million. It's a little under 9 million for that year, fiscal 2023. But you're right that the movement from DCBS to OHA did, there's some wrinkle there where the money kind of came over in a way that some of the excess funds were used to cover were counted into the expenditures. I'm not an expert on that, how that happened exactly. I wasn't involved in that during that time period. But yeah, the 2022 and 21, I think there was some discontinuity there related to that movement. Jumping back to where we were here.
So Caleb, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. I just wanted to do a time check. We are down to our last, ideally 4 minutes, so that we can end our meeting based on the OHA wellness policy. But there's been a robust discussion as well. So wanted to really just warn us that we are coming close to time, please.
And we are down to the last couple of slides here. So here's sort of the marketplace transfers and credits historically, and what we would estimate the 1.9 million would be the estimated calendar year 2024 rebate credit to carriers. So, that money would get dispersed sort of prorated monthly to the carriers. And so you would expect then, we do collect the money, but we also do give it back. And I understand that that's not necessarily how we want to do it. But if our estimates are accurate, we won't do this for fiscal year 23-25. If our estimates are inaccurate, then there's that possibility. Okay. That's really kind of wraps up this presentation. We do recommend the $5.50 as the assessment. It's in line with what it has been. So even as premiums have gone up, 3 or more % a year, the assessment hasn't changed, and in fact has gone down since 2018. So at a relative rate, the assessment is declining for what that's worth. And I think that eventually we're going to hit this equilibrium, and I don't know if our estimates will be right on this next biennium, but there would be a point there where we're going to cross and hit an equilibrium as the relative rates go down and the expenditures continue to go up. Okay, so that's the material I had. I did want to point out there was a couple of, and sorry, this is on me. There was a typo and there was a little part where we had changed the tables in the memo, but it hadn't got updated in the text and narrative that got distributed to you. So I was hoping that we could resend out a revised version of the memo if that's okay, and this PowerPoint for people that want it. Recognizing, and I'm sort of springing this on Cheeky, it's just when I was reviewing the memo this morning and I found a paragraph where something hadn't been updated in the text. The tables were all correct, but the text had the wrong number in a particular spot. So maybe we send out a revision. Is that okay?
Yes, we can do that. We can resend the revision as well as repost on our website.
Okay, sorry about that, but just wanted to correct that. Just because it might create confusion. The numbers are all correct in the tables, but there was something in the text that needed to get updated.
Caleb, can you bring down your slide deck, please? So that
Yeah,
we
sure.
can see
Yeah,
everybody.
sorry about that. Thank
That's
you all.
okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Caleb, for walking us through the process. So for your reference, the proposal you have in front of you has been reviewed by Dave Baden, the interim Oregon Health Authority Director, as well as the Chief Financial Officer of OHA, Ali Hassoun as the interim HPA Director, Matt Betts as the HPA Business Operations Director, and myself as the Marketplace Director. Should we go forward, the rulemaking will be the next step, and we'd be happy to send you the information via email on what that looks like. So Victor, I'm sorry, we're just gonna have to send those updates through email, and what that process looks like. It's another, I believe it's a 45-day process, but I could be wrong. We file the rules, there's a public hearing, and moves to be finalized for the 2024. So if I can please take a minute or so to get a pulse of any additional questions. If we can't answer them today, we'll follow up. Or if you are comfortable enough to say, let's go forward with this recommendation for this time, let's please do so. So I'll do a quick roll call. Let me know if you want additional information or if you vote yay or nay. So Chair Anderson.
I'm supportive of keeping it where it is. Just if I can have a moment, maybe to Paul's point, keeping an eye on whether we're accruing some sort of ongoing surplus. And then the last thing I would say, I think there's a House Bill 2044 that affects dental assessments. I just was curious, not to throw a wrench in things, maybe that's dead, but anyone familiar with that?
I believe, Anthony, if you're on, if you can give us an update about House Bill 2044 about the dental assessment.
For a change in how dental is assessed off exchange.
Yeah, so for a little while we were working with off exchange dental carriers to assess those that apply for certification of the plan with respect to meeting the pediatric dental requirement. We certify those off exchange plans. We were meeting with them about imposing an assessment. It actually is an assessment in Senate Bill 65 from 2021 that moved the exchange to the to OHA, but that assessment wasn't drafted correctly, and so it calculates out to zero. So we talked to those insurers, dental insurers, about an assessment, and they were generally in agreement that we would do something by rule. At some point, this operation was taken over by government relations, OHA's government relations, and I haven't heard anything about the bill since. So I'm assuming it's not going anywhere.
So Craig, just to simplify as well, we collectively developed this model and this assessment rate based on how we know how things are as of today. So we don't know if that's going to pass. We don't know if the basic health plan will pass. So how we think 2024 will be as things are as of today. So should we know if 2044 will pass, then we'll make those adjustments ideally for 2025.
Great, thank you. Yeah, otherwise I'm in favor of the assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Gladys Batwell.
Yay.
Thank you. Ron Gallinat.
I am supportive.
Thank you. Mary Beth Guarino, were you able to join us today? Paul Harmon.
I support. Appreciate the chat.
Thank you, Paul. Ines Kemper. Holly Sorensen.
I vote yay in support.
Thank you very much. Director Stolfi, were you able to join us? Om Sakinai.
Yeah, support.
Thank you. Drew Tarab.
I support.
Thank you. Neshoba Temperley.
I'm in support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. We are exactly at 11:30. Thank you so much for your time. There was a lot of information in a condensed amount of time. We have a few things to follow up with you on, and we'll do so via email. If you have any questions, additional questions that pop up after the meeting, please do send them our way, and we will make sure to respond to you in as quick as a fashion as we can make it during legislative season. So either way, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, thank you, Caleb, for your presentation. We will be in touch. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.